Hi all, and welcome to my darkroom. If you survived my video on making Kallitypes, then you won't be surprised to see everything here in a white balance adjustment defying shade of headache yellow-orange. It doesn't look all that bad in real life, but boy, it sure does on video. Today we'll be making a new cyanotype, and if we're lucky, I might even turn on an incandescent light for part of the recording. Unless you're just really lost on YouTube today, I'm going to assume that you know what a cyanotype is. New cyanotype is just a modern twist on the process, conceived by chemist Mike Ware. In his article, he made some pretty compelling arguments about why his process would produce a Prussian blue that stayed in the paper fibers better, so I full-on drank the ammonium dichromate Kool-Aid and went for his version instead of using a classic two-part cyanotype recipe. We interrupt this video to bring you a note, because this is the internet, and I cannot assume that my sarcasm will be properly interpreted. Don't ever, under any circumstances, ever ingest anything with the word dichromate in it. Ever. You will die. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Just like with my Kallitypes, I'm using digital negatives printed with an inkjet on Pictorico transparency film. Although this time I at least had the decency to use an image that was originally captured on HP5 instead of a digital camera. In fact, I've tried really hard to find the right mix of sensitizer components that will let me use the exact same digital negatives I have for Kallitypes and still get cyanotypes with good tonal range. I think I'm pretty close now. And of course, I'm relying once again on my good friend Hahnemuhle Platinum Rag. HPR has never let me down. HPR is one of the real ones. First things first, I need to mark the corners of my image on the paper so we know where to paint the sensitizer on. Now I'll prep my sensitizer in this highly scientific shot glass. This bottle contains the actual sensitizer itself. I had to make it by doing some weird chemistry experiments by light of a full moon, described in depth by Mike Ware in his article on new cyanotypes. I'll leave it to you to look that up if you want to try this. But this is the stuff that actually makes Prussian blue when exposed to UV light. I also have some 10% citric acid solution and some 20% tween 20 solution. Depending on your paper type, climate, astrological sign, and how much you've recently angered your chosen deity, you may find you don't need tween 20. With my setup, if I don't use enough of it, my Prussian blue basically just sits on top of the paper instead of getting down into the fibers, and then the image washes out really badly in the tray. The citric acid is basically there to decrease the contrast of the final print. The more sensitizer you swap out for citric acid, the lower the contrast will be, and unfortunately the lower the Dmax will be too. So far, I've found that making my final solution in the shot glass consist of 3% citric acid solution and 2% tween 20 solution, with the rest being actual sensitizer, works pretty well with the negatives that I already had for Kallitype printing. I'm still kind of honing that in as I go. I've pre-wet my dedicated new cyanotype brush with a bit of distilled water so that it doesn't absorb my sensitizer, and now I'll brush it on. I have to let it get completely dry in the dark before I expose it, or else I get uneven tonality in the print. Usually this takes about an hour, but I tend to err on the side of drying too long instead of drying too little. Once it's dry, I put the ink side of the negative in contact with the sensitizer side of the paper and lock the sandwich into my contact printing frame. This squeezes them together tightly and ensures I get perfect contact during exposure, resulting in a sharp image. With my extraordinarily professional looking and well-polished DIY ultraviolet exposure box, I need 10 full minutes of exposure to reach Dmax. Your mileage may vary on exposure times, so you'll need to do your own experiments. Cyanotype is what's known as a printing out process. Kallitype, by contrast, is a developing out process. Basically, that means with cyanotype, when your exposure is finished, you have an image that already looks pretty close to its final form, and there's no need for a chemical developer step. If you watch the Kallitype video, you'll remember that the image was barely visible after exposure, but appeared really quickly when it was developed. The new cyanotype image will be kind of a grayish blue with yellow highlights when it comes out of the contact printing frame. Now we basically just have to wash it. One fun fact about Prussian blue, which you can whip out at your next dinner party or corporate event, is that it hates alkaline pH. On an unrelated note, my water comes out of the tap at a pH of about 8.1. Make what you will of those two discrete pieces of information. What I make of it is that I should do my rinsing and washing in acidified water. And in fact, I use a 3% citric acid solution for 60 seconds as my first rinse. You've met him before. He had a brief cameo as Clearing Bath in my Kallitype video. This extra acidic first bath seems to really help achieve a lovely deep blue color in the final print. After discarding this strongly acidic first bath, I do 2 back-to-back 10-minute washes in slightly acidified tap water. Just enough citric acid in here to get it down below a neutral pH of 7. I've heard rumors in various dark corners of the internet that using different types of acid with your first bath can give you slightly different colors. Apparently, acetic acid, aka vinegar, aka Kodak Stop Bath, will give a more greenish cyan tone, while citric acid pushes things more toward the indigo or purplish side of blue. Mike Ware himself recommends nitric acid. Unfortunately, I have strict rules about how many types of acid I keep on hand in my darkroom, and I'm already weirdly close to my personal limit. I'm a firm believer in being very intentional about acid use when making art. Not all of us can be Paul McCartney. So yeah, I've only ever used citric acid. If you did things right, the image isn't going to change much during washing, and in fact, if you live somewhere with neutral or acidic tap water, you can probably just wash it in running water in the tray for 20 minutes or so. If you notice that your image is bleaching out or lightening significantly during the wash, you either have alkalinity destroying your Prussian blue, or you just didn't get the sensitizer down into the fibers well enough and you need to use more tween 20, or extend your drying time, or use more sensitizer and less citric acid, or various combinations of those things. Isn't troubleshooting alt processes fun and straightforward? The print is pretty nice looking already as I hang it on the line to dry, but for the next few days, as it is exposed to air, it will oxidize further and achieve an even deeper blue tone. If you're impatient, you can use some hydrogen peroxide in your final rinse to speed along that oxidation. I've done it a few times, but nobody seems to be able to give me a straight answer on whether H2O2 has any bad long-term effects on the print, so these days I just let nature take its course and skip the peroxide step. Just something to keep in mind if you were planning on immediately hermetically sealing your cyanotype next to David Duchovny's hand. You can do all sorts of stuff with cyanotypes. People tone them in tannins or various metals, or use them as a base to do more advanced printing like gum dichromate color over the top. I don't do any of that. I just want a regular blue print. Some stuff looks really nice in blue, you know? Here's the final scan print after it had a few days to breathe in our famously clean Utah air and reach its final tone. Very nice. And this photo only has mild asthma now. Cyanotypes are a great first step to get into alt process printing. You don't need expensive noble metals like with platinum palladium prints or gold tone Kallitypes or whatever. You don't even need slightly expensive silver nitrate. All the chemicals you need to make one are pretty cheap, and the processing doesn't need to be any more complicated than washing in water with a pH below 7. You don't even need a true darkroom. And in a pinch, a sheet of glass over the top of your negative and paper can sometimes work in place of a proper contact printing frame. Go give it a try, and please feel free to reach out to me or leave me a comment if you have any questions. I'll forward all of them directly to Mike Ware since he actually knows what he's talking about. That's it, everyone. Thanks for watching. Go be with your families.